friends, welcome to library. So we're going into chapter 22, the stupid ending. And I'm not quite sure what that might mean, but it seems like the boys are in a real pickle. They are in the boat, in the hurricane, floating down, unable to navigate, unable to stop themselves. Ricocheting, that means they're bouncing off of trees. So the boat could overturn, anything bad could happen here. Oh, I'm really rooting that the boys make it out of this. Here we are, the stupid ending. Eventually, eventually, Frederick and Antbite were too exhausted to do anything but hold on to the sides of the boat as the wind knocked them into trees and hurled sticks and leaves and water at them. Pine needles stung Frederick's arms and face as they hit him. Gradually, the rain stopped. The wind became a breeze, and then a breath, and then stilled completely as early light stained the forest around them. Frederick had been wrong before about a little water not being too bad. After being wet for so long, he was shivering and shriveled. He and Antbite balanced on the boat's metal bench seats and propped their feet up on the sides to keep them out of the water. The pinky finger on Frederick's right hand was bloody and aching from where Antbite had bitten it. As the sun rose, they saw that they were floating through the world of water. It stretched in every direction. Everywhere trees had fallen to the ground or snapped in half. Giant limbs speared the earth and rose out of the water. Their boat had dented, their boat was dented and had deep scratches in the hull. It looked like it had been attacked by a pack of velociraptors. Isn't it a beautiful day? Antbite said, smiling upward and closing his eyes against the sunlight. He looked like he had been run through a washing machine, but he seemed cheerful. As if in agreement, a bird over their heads began to chirp. That was, Frederick said, the worst idea anyone ever had. Ever. I'm sorry about your finger, Antbite said. I didn't know it was your finger, and I thought I was drowning, and I just. He clicked his teeth. Hey, is that a monkey? Antbite asked suddenly. Frederick followed Antbite's gaze. A monkey was standing on a lower limb of a nearby tree, pulling on its bottom lip as if it was perplexed at finding itself in a magnolia. Sure enough, it's a monkey. It must be from the zoo, Frederick said. I wonder how many animals they lost. One of the drivers said there were nails in the road. Antbite's eyes widened. I didn't put nails in the road. I didn't say you did, Frederick said. The professor might have, Antbite said, but I didn't. What? Frederick asked. Why would... Do you hear that? Antbite asked. At first, Frederick thought Antbite was trying to distract him, but then he heard it too. There was a growling sound, and it was growing louder. That's a motor, Frederick said. A few seconds later, he saw Glow's diesel truck inching through the trees, angling toward them. Eric was leaning out of the passenger window with a pair of binoculars surveying the woods. Hey! Frederick yelled. He stood up, waving his arms. The boat wobbled dangerously, and he sat down again before he fell. Eric's binoculars swept past the boat. Over here! Antbite yelled. Eric! Frederick shouted. The binoculars swept back and stopped on them. Yes! Antbite and Frederick cheered together. Eric lowered the binoculars and pointed at them. Dash! Anthony! Eric shouted in a raspy voice. Stay right there! As if Frederick and Antbite were about to run away. Frederick saw that Benjamin was behind the steering wheel. Through the windshield, he saw the counselor's face light up when he spotted them. He started punching the horn. Beep, beep! Benjamin leaped out of the truck before it had come to a complete stop and ran over, splashing water as he came. Eric jumped out and strode toward the boat, too. The head counselor's socks sagged and bagged around his ankles. His sunglasses dangled from a strap around his neck. Are you okay? Benjamin yelled over the splashing. Are you hurt? We're fine, Eric called back. Benjamin reached them and leaned over, bracing his hands against his knees. You said you'd be here last night, Frederick exclaimed, looking up at Benjamin from his seat on the boat. Where were you? Yeah, what happened? Antbite demanded. We got back to camp early in the afternoon. We waited in the main building forever and you never came. We've been looking for you all night. Benjamin's blue polo was rumpled. He had purple crescents under his eyes, and his cheeks looked covered in patchy stubble. But he looked great to Frederick. And then Eric got the truck stuck. I did not, Eric snapped, walking up. He crossed his arms and looked at Benjamin. You were the navigator. You should have warned me about the bog. Eric adjusted his shorts as he turned to survey the flooded woods. Benjamin rolled his eyes upward and then looked back to the boys. Y'all are in about 3 inches of water, he said, looking down in the water. I'm surprised that boat'll even float. Why don't you just get out? Frederick and Aunt Bite looked over the edge of the boat and down. Then they looked at each other. They scrambled out of the boat and onto the ground that they could have been walking on for the last several hours. Aunt Bite and Frederick got to the back seat of the truck, and Benjamin drove slowly through the woods, dodging fallen trees. Thanks for finding us, Frederick said. Yeah, Aunt Bite agreed fervently. Eric twisted around to face the two of them. Men of character don't leave anyone behind, he said. Do you know if my parents are okay? There was a thread of worry in Aunt Bite's voice. Where do they live? Eric asked. Macon. Oh, that's really far inland, the head counselor told him. They're fine. Aunt Bite didn't look completely relieved. They'll be a lot better once they know you're safe, Benjamin said. He glanced at Aunt Bite and Frederick in the rear view. Glo wanted to stay and look for you too, he assured them. But she had to drive one of the buses with the campers. He paused. I told her I'd find you, even though they didn't cover natural disasters or search parties in our training. You did great, counselor, Frederick said. In the rear view, Frederick saw Benjamin smile. They finally made it to the road, but it was covered with fallen trees too, and it took them 10 minutes to reach a sign that said, You are leaving Camp Omagashi, where boys are transformed. They hadn't made it much further when they saw a car that had stopped blocked by a tree. The car was familiar to Frederick, and just as he was saying, Hey, that's my... His mom, his dad, and Sarah Ann scrambled out of the Corolla, leaving the doors wide open. Frederick! His dad yelled as they clambered awkwardly over the tree and then ran to the truck. Before Frederick knew it, they were opening his door and dragging him out and into their arms, not even letting his feet touch the ground. His mom was sobbing and holding his head. His dad was hugging his legs, and Sarah Ann was had his middle. Why didn't you evacuate? Frederick asked when they finally put him down. Because you were missing, Sarah Ann said and punched him in the arm. Did you think we would leave without our baby? Mrs. Frederick rubbed her nose. And then we got, she hiccuped, a call from the police that you were here. We wouldn't have let the cat behind in that storm, his dad said, much less our kid. Eric, Benjamin, and Aunt Bite had gotten out of the truck and were standing a short distance from the Fredericksons. Mr. Frederickson walked over and shook all of their hands, even Aunt Bite's. While they were standing there, another truck drove up and stopped behind the car. It was Joel's dad in his Super Duty four-wheel drive, and Joel was in the front seat. Frederick felt like he had missed a step going downstairs. It seemed like it had been weeks since he had seen Joel. It startled him to realize that Joel looked the same as always, but he looked different too. Frederick didn't know how both of those things could be true. You're all right, Mr. Mincy bellowed as he jumped out of his truck. He ran over and pulled Frederick into a hug that squished his cheek against Mr. Mincy's chest. Mr. Mincy was wearing the same blue shorts and flip-flops he had had on at Joel's party, and he had a scrubby beard on his jaw. We headed this way as soon as we heard. His chest was heaving against Frederick's face. I've been out looking for you since the party. I'm sorry I took your boat, Frederick said in a muffled voice, and I'm sorry I lost your motor. Joel had gotten out of his dad's truck and was walking over slowly. He looked rumpled and tired and a little shy, which wasn't like Joel at all. He kept glancing at Frederick and then looking away, like he was afraid Frederick was going to yell at him. Oh, it's all my fault, Mr. Mincy exclaimed, letting go of Frederick and wiping away tears that were streaming down his face. Frederick glanced at his dad, expecting to exchange an uncomfortable look with him, but Mr. Frederickson was wiping his own eyes. I should have taught all you boys how to drive the boat, Mr. Mincy said to Frederick. I'm going to, he said. I'm going to make sure the next time you're in my boat, you can drive it right. I'll make a captain out of you, son, Mr. Mincy scrubbed his nose. After hours of sitting on a metal bench seat in a hurricane, Frederick didn't want to get back in Mr. Mincy's boat ever again. But he didn't say that. He was too tired to string words together. Joel was still standing back, but he took a few steps forward. Hey, he said to Frederick, still not meeting his eyes. I'm glad you're okay. Yeah, Frederick said uncertainly. He wasn't sure why Joel was acting so weird. Normally, he would have been telling everyone loudly how Frederick was bound to get lost in a storm because he was a loser, and how if he had been lost in a storm, he wouldn't have been scared at all. It was a stupid joke, Joel blurted then, shaking his head. That thing about giving you the boat and making fun of you because you missed your vacation, I didn't mean it for anything bad to happen. I thought I was being funny. Everybody was looking at Joel and his shoulders hunched up toward his ears. It wasn't funny, Joel said. I'm sorry. Everyone's eyes turned to Frederick then. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Joel had been terrible, and a part of Frederick wanted to tell Joel that, yeah, he had been awful and Frederick was done with him. But then he thought about how he owed the other guys in Camp 13 an apology, and how he really hoped they would tell him that it didn't matter. He wished they were here right now, and that they would tell him that they still liked him and that they were still his friends. It's okay, Frederick said. He paused. You're my best friend, he added. Joel lifted his head and finally met Frederick's eyes. He looked startled, his eyebrows climbing, and then a smile broke over his face. Frederick felt himself smile too, and then he realized that his mom and dad and Sarah Ann and Mr. Mincy, Eric Benjamin, and Aunt Bite were all looking at him and Joel. His neck got hot and he shifted his feet. This camp, Mr. Mincy said to Benjamin, breaking the silence. Is it occupied now? Are there kids? Are there more kids missing? Because I'm willing to keep searching. Benjamin rocked on his toes and then back on his heels. The other boys have been evacuated to Valdosta. They're going there. Oh, we are going there now to get them back to their homes. They should be all right. Of course they'll be all right, Eric said, puffing out his chest. Safety and preparation are the hallmarks of this program here. Then how did these two boys wind up alone in the middle of a hurricane? Frederick's mom demanded, rounding on Eric, who took a step back. Mr. Fredrickson put a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. We need to get going, Mr. Mincy said, eyeing Mrs. Fredrickson warily. It should have taken us an hour to get here, but it took 3. Storms block so many roads. He eyed the tree across the pavement in front of the Fredricksons' car. I had to get my chainsaw out twice. Mrs. Fredrickson glared at Eric a moment longer, then turned to Frederick. Let's go home, baby, she said. Sarah Ann was already walking back to their car. Frederick's legs were suddenly heavy. He wanted to go home and sleep for a week, but his brain was slowly putting things together and realizing that he was going home, but Aunt Bite wasn't coming with him. He was going somewhere else. His own parents were waiting for him, and Nosebleed, and the professor, and Specs. How long would it be before he could tell them that he was sorry? Or what if he never got to? Bye, Aunt Bite said, taking a step toward Frederick. He looked like he was going to hug Frederick, and then he held out his hand. Frederick had only known Aunt Bite for 2 days, but they had survived a hurricane together, and a lion attack, and atomic dodgeball, and rope climbing, and he didn't know what to say. But he was sure that goodbye didn't cover it. He shook Aunt Bite's hand. The other boy squeezed his bitten finger, and he winced. He started to say. Thank you for. Hey, Aunt Bite said. It's Anthony. What? Frederick asked. My name's Anthony, Aunt Bite shrugged. And I want you to know, I like you better than the real Dash. Frederick tried to smile. Joel walked up to him and threw his arm around Frederick's shoulder. Come on, man, he said, and walked with Frederick to the car. Despite Frederick's protest that he was perfectly fine, his mom actually buckled him into a seat, like he was a toddler. The doors slammed. Mr. Mincy steered his roaring truck around, and Frederick's dad drove behind him. Frederick looked back through the rear windshield. Eric was stoically watching them leave, his arms crossed. Aunt Bite and Benjamin waved, and then they were so far away that Frederick couldn't see their faces. His last thought, before he fell asleep against the window, was that this was a stupid ending. So is this how it ends, friends? Everybody just separates and he doesn't get to say he's sorry and wants to be friends with everybody? Ay, ay, ay. Stay tuned. I think there's going to be more. Thank you for reading with me, and we'll see what happens in the next chapter.